to meet those the demands. So when you look at the consumer, what they're looking for as a producer, this creates lots of responsibilities on your part. All at once now, a slide on the left side there is sort of a schematic of the marketing chain from the cow-calf down to the food service folks having a dinner there. And when you get into direct marketing, you take on all these production areas or the production chain in terms of the animal production, the marketing, as well as the processing. So all at once, your knowledge base has to really expand. A lot of you do a lot of good things in terms of managing your cattle, genetic selection, BQA programs, maybe in terms of marketing, but dealing with this, a lot of folks lack some of the meat processing quote, beef you up in that area, particularly that marketing area. And when you look at marketing, you need to brand your product. You know, they need to know who you are in the marketplace. You got to develop your consumers and your customer base. You got to evaluate your competition. Where do you fit in? You hear a lot about niche marketing. So where do you fit? What's your niche? What are you going to provide to that customer that's unique? Communication is very important because you're the go-between person now between, if you're doing freezer beef, the customer and the processor. But if you get then more into retail cut sales, you're going to have regulatory agencies. Big question I get is deals with pricing. How do I establish my prices? And then one of the things we sort of think of on the back end is guarantees on your product that you deliver. What happens if something goes wrong? Tonight we're going to talk about the two major marketing methods. One would be selling live animals to consumers who in turn have those animals harvested and processed at what we call a custom exempt meat processing facility. And the other will be processing, packaging, labeling, retail cuts that go directly to the consumer. And a lot of this will be off the farm. You see the catchphrases, farm to freezer, gate to plate, but farmers market sales, some internet sales. And we're going to touch a little bit on food service. If you want to go into selling to restaurants and to grocery stores, would be this. So first thing you need to decide is what is your marketing objective? Who are you going to sell to? What's your business going to look at? Is it going to be freezer beef or is it going to be retail cuts? Where are you going to sell? Internet, farmers markets. Are you going to have claims, production claims, grass versus grain-fed or natural and organic? And we're not going to get into those too much, but there's some resources out there to help you. First thing I want to start off with is marketing animals to the consumers for further processing. As I said, this is what we generally refer to as the freezer beef industry or custom exempt beef. And here the producers sell the live animal to the customer. And we probably need to emphasize the word live animal to the customer. Then that new owner of that animal will have it harvested and custom processed for them. And this can be done in a custom exempt meat facility. Two very important parts is that meat may not be sold, and all of that product must be labeled not for sale. I want to take a few minutes here and talk about custom exempt versus USDA inspection. Custom exempt is where you slaughter and process the livestock for the owner's own use. You look at the USDA regulation is for the owner, their guest, and non-paying guest, and at no time should that meat be sold, and it has to be labeled not for sale. And one thing that escapes a lot of folks is that even though these custom exempt plants may not be USDA inspected, they are under USDA guidelines and they are subject to periodic inspection. And these plants usually get looked at every once or twice a year. The USDA inspection is a program delivered by the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food Safety and Inspection Service, and they provide this at federally inspected plants. A good thing about USDA inspection is that product can be shipped across state lines and even internationally. And particularly when we look at the Tri-Cities area, Chattanooga, Memphis, even Nashville, we're not too far from borders. And if you want to be able to expand into that area with retail cuts and such, you've got to have USDA inspection. Now, the interesting part about USDA inspection is that that plant is required to have a HACCP plan and what we call SSOP, stands for Standard Sanitation Operation Procedures. And a HACCP plan, both of those are involved in food safety, ways of intervening in order to try to prevent a food poisoning episode or an unwholesome situation. The other part of that is that the USDA plants are required to keep a record of this information and recall plans and these kinds of things. Now, a big difference between USDA inspection and custom exempt is that when there's USDA inspection taking place, there's an inspector there and they do daily inspection of the processing facilities, and they do each individual animal before and after it's slaughtered. So if we look at our commercial plants, our big plants, those cattle are delivered. An inspector goes out into the pens. They look for animals that show disease conditions or injury that might affect the wholesomeness of that product. That's called antemortem inspection. And then once that animal is harvested and starts going through the dressing procedures, there's several inspections that take place in that harvesting line, looking at internal organs, looking at lymph glands, looking at the carcass itself for contaminations like hide or hair or fecal material. So during that harvesting process, that animal is exposed to inspection several times. Another function of USDA inspection is to make sure the product is properly labeled. Now, a few tips if you're doing this freezer beef and selling animals to a customer that will convert that into a product for themselves in their home. It's very important that you document the sale of a live animal. You don't want to leave the impression that you're selling meat. And I've seen instances where I've seen advertisements. Used to be, I'd listen to a show before I went to church, and all at once one day there's advertising meat that you could purchase and buy a quarter and a half. And as a producer, we don't think too much about it. We know what a beef side is and a carcass, but technically those are meat terms and they should not be used in marketing that live animal. You can have multiple buyers for a beef animal, but each of those buyers' names should be on that bill of sale. There should be an understanding of how that is going to be split with your customer. As I said, avoid using meat terms in your marketing program. We sell most of our product based on live weights or by the head. We need to try to avoid selling on a carcass basis or the hanging weight basis, because again, that's getting pretty close to be selling meat. And I've actually changed what I do. I got a scale here at the house. I weigh my lambs, and I use that as a guide for pricing. But technically, if you sell by the pound on a live weight basis, those scales should be certified by technical interpretation of the law. So I sell by the head now, and I think that's probably a safe thing to do. So on my bill of sale, I document the breed of the animal and an ear tag and maybe a sex on that. So it's pretty obvious that I am selling a live animal to that customer. And you need to document that sale and maintain records of those. And if you can, a copy of where the funds have been transferred. Ideally, the buyer should pay and communicate with the processing facility. Again, this is one of those opinion things I told you I'd just throw out. A lot of our customers, particularly some of those consumer groups, they want the convenience, say, of having on the at home storage, but they don't want anything to do with the harvesting, the concept of harvesting and killing and showing up at that processing plant. But ideally, they prefer that customer pays and does that business with the processing facility. I think as a marketer in this time period, you need to work with your processor. The one you're using or a couple of that you're using, you need to know what they have to offer, know what their cutting styles are. Are they willing to make a boneless roast, or they just want to make bone-in cuts? Don't want to do any boneless or anything. What are some other options they might have? Instead of just a chub pack of ground beef, can they make patties? Can they make cube steaks? Do some slicing. Some plants offer packaging option, vacuum packaging or paper wrap. And with some of these options comes differences in prices. And working with your customer, you need to be aware of that processing information. You need to be aware of what it's going to cost to get that animal in a form that they can take home with them. One of the things I like to do is assist the customer with the cut options. If you look at a cutting sheet, even with a packing plant, they might have a T-bone and porterhouse versus top loin and tenderloin. You can't get both of those. You're either going to get T-bones and porterhouses, you're going to get strips and tenderloins. And I had a co-worker, they shared this with me just a few months ago. They had a beef killed, and he shared it with his sister or sister-in-law. And they was talking, said, have you tried any of the beef? I said, yeah, I've tried some ground beef. And said, just the other night we had some T-bone steaks. So they were really, really good. Next year when we do this, I want all the beef cut into T-bone steaks. Now, they're going to be disappointed, because when you do the bulk purchase like this, you get it all. And even some of those variety meats that they may or may not want to do. And I personally like to visit with my customers, and I talk to them, how many's in your family? How do you prepare meat? And if they say, well, we like roast or crock pot, or we grill mostly, then that gives me an idea that which direction I can lead them to, and rather making steaks or chop, in my case of my lambs, chops versus roast. It's very easy to divert that shoulder roast into shoulder chops, and because they're grilling. How many pieces they need in a package? Is it a family of 2 empty nesters, or is it a family of 6 and they got 4 growing kids? And it helps you. I like to help them and guide them as we go and even if I'm using the processors or my own cutting sheet. Now, give an ad for the University of Tennessee, but we have several resource materials that can help you. We have one called A General Guide to Marketing Live Animals for Custom Exempt Harvesting. It's publication 1821, and it'll go into more detail of some of those things that I've mentioned with you tonight. If you're interested in doing this, I'd highly recommend that you go online to the UT Center for Profitable Agriculture and look under the publications, and you can find this one. Another publication in the same area is called Improving Communications with Your Beef Processor. And it talks about some of those things of working with that processor on cuts and how much meat you'll get. We'll cover that toward the end. Packaging, aging, and some of those questions that you might have or your customer might have in being able to be that middle person between your customer and the processor. Our next option would be looking at marketing retail cuts to consumers. Now, this method of marketing is highly regulated, and it must the meat must originate from a USDA inspected facility that is operating under USDA inspection at the time that animal is harvested and fabricated. In order to sell retail cuts, you must obtain a retail meat sales permit from the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. Is a nominal fee for that. If you're interested in this, you just need to contact the Department of Ag and tell them that you request a permit. And along with that, they'll work with you, and you'll need to request an inspection. And this will be after you make contact. They'll send you some information. And some of the things they'll do when they come out to visit with you will be interested in how you're going to transport that product from the processor to your storage facility, and how you're going to transport that retail cut if you're going to be marketed it away from the house. Now, if you're just going to do on the farm sales, folks drive up and purchase there on the farm, that would probably be good. But if you're going downtown to the farmer's market, you're going to have an approved method of transporting that product and to keep it safe. When you look at your storage units, they need to be located in a secure place, away from potential contaminations. So you're not going to put it in the corner of your machine shed where you got the oils and the greases and all this kind of stuff, or in your feed room where you could have a potential rodent problem. And these units have to be dedicated to the meat sales. And you really shouldn't be putting your lunch bags or anything like that. As you might expect, the thermometers are required in all your storage units, whether it be a cooler or refrigerator, freezer. And it's real nice if you very inexpensive recorders that you can put in there and actually monitor those for you, and you can download those, and you've got a permanent record of that storage temperature. They must be maintained, they say 41 degrees. I'm a real cold person. I'd like to see that colder myself. In the meat industry, we have a saying that life begins at 40. We're not talking about 40 years of age. We're talking about 40 degrees. From 40 to 140, that's the danger zone for bacteria. And so cold is our friend. Meat doesn't freeze to about 28 degrees, so you've got a lot of leeway there. Keep it colder, but not freezing it. And then they'll be looking for ways that you would handle that product, and that you've got personal hygiene, clean hands, and outer clothing and such like this. Another thing with selling retail cuts is that they must meet state and federal label requirements. And there's about 8 items that are required to be on a label. I'll show you a brochure that we have that will help you with that. Another thing is that in Tennessee, it is required that meat be sold on a net weight basis. And basically, each package has to have a weight and value on that. So you can't just dump a box put 5 T-bones together and charge $50 for them. They have to be individually priced, and that's what you've got to sell them for. Several years ago, we had a nutritional labeling requirement that we put on, and the whole muscle cuts have to have this. But it's pretty easy to get around it in terms of you can have what we call point of purchase brochure, or you can just have a sign like in your meat shop or your area where you're selling. You can have a poster up that gives the name of the cut and some nutritional information, and that'll get you by. Another thing is the safe handling instructions. I've sort of left that off, and you've probably noticed that on some of the meat products that you have bought in a store. All meat products have to have safe handling. It gets me in some of the places. It doesn't say you have to be able to read them, but you've got to be able to see that that safe handling portion is on that. An extension of this would be selling to what we call non-retail customers. These would primarily folks be interested in selling to restaurants or to your local grocery down the road or something like this. The Tennessee Department of Agriculture permit that you've already requested only allows for sale of meat to retail customers. If you're going to move into what I refer to as a wholesale business, then you're going to have to go another step, and you need to contact the USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service, Office of Investigation, Enforcement, and Audit, OIEA, and we can put all these together and you can get some real alphabet soup in there. But basically, they're just going to follow up a little bit more on your protocols. And what you would do is request an on-site consultation. And during this consultation, they'll discuss many of the same things TDA has: safe handling, storage, transportation. They do have a food defense issue. We'll talk about that. But then you'll register for your meat sales, and this is the first step that you'll be able to you have to have that in order to get your permit. And once all that goes through, you'll be registered and you get a permit. It's a form 5021, probably have to fill out. And best of my knowledge, there's no charge for this particular permit. Now there are some guidelines. If you don't exceed a certain amount, you can sell a little bit, but keep in mind as you plan maybe this business adventure, these are some of those hurdles that you're going to have to negotiate as you go down the road. And so when we look at that on-site review by the OIEA, again, it deals with product safety and wholesomeness and make sure none of the products have been adulterated. And you can see there storage and handling. One new term there is food security plans, your labeling and packaging and handling procedures and your sanitary conditions. And with this, they'll introduce hazard controls and plant or product recalls. So when you move into this side, you've got a little bit more regulatory aspects that you have to account for. Those food defense plans will be outside security, inside security, employees, visitor plans, hazardous materials. You got any ingredients that you're storing, shipping, receiving areas. And basically what that is, it's sort of biosecurity concept. You know, somebody cannot come in and adulterate a product without your knowledge and this kind of stuff. And a lot, you know, a lot more paperwork. Again, we have some excellent resources at your disposal. Those basic regulatory considerations for retail and non-retail, a lot more detail in this booklet. Again, that's available from the Center for Profitable Agriculture. Here's one on labeling and some of the approval steps that you'd have to go through, a little bit on marketing claims, and real nice brochure that will guide you through some of those. CPA also has an information sheet on product labeling, particularly those animal raising claims like organic, grass-fed, raised without antibiotics, those kinds of marketing terms that you could use to find your niche. So good resources that'll give you a little bit more information. So sort of summarize this section, there's lots of direct marketing challenges, particularly from the production side. Questions I get deal with, you know, having product available year round. What are my yields? How much am I going to get? Maintaining quality, initial quality, processing, harvesting. Anybody's doing this right now, you know, we're really, really in a bind in our harvest facilities. I know of plants that are already taken, are booking out through 2021. And I had a beef producer fussing, said, I've got to make a booking before I even wean my calves. And I said, well, you think about us in the sheep business, we have to make a booking before we ever breed to you. And it's just a real hardship right now. You need to be aware of the labeling requirements, of regulations, sale tax laws, and these kinds of things. Looks like harvesting and but processing there, your volume. Are you going to, how many cattle do you need to kill a week or a month? What's your demand? Where are you going to sell? And the big thing is your product mix. When you look at some of the products, how many roast sell? Which roast I have converted to cube meat or stew meat? You know, am I going to sell just retail? Am I going to try to do some wholesales with a little restaurant down the road? And then liability insurance that needs to go along with this. You need to be a good spokesperson for your business. You need to be able to communicate not only with your customers and your marketing plans and such, but you will deal with regulatory compliance people. I think an issue that we often overlook is labor. When you look at this, you say, I can do this. And visiting with producers, and they find that they have a whole host of things to do in terms of the production side, the marketing side, and doing all the logistics. Then they go to the farmer's market and they sit there for 4 hours and do this maybe twice a week or 2 to 3 times at different localities. Over a period of time, they develop what we refer to as farmer's market fatigue. It just wears them out. And so you got to hire somebody. And then probably one of the big things is the short-term versus long-term. Any business startup is tough. And it takes a while to get those overhead costs worked out where that you can really start thinking long-term and do some of these. Now, Sarah, I've come to sort of a breaking point. You want to ask a question?
Yes, let me get that pulled up right here. The first question you sent me?
That'd be fine.
Okay. There we go. Should be live. And while they're answering that, we did have a question in the chat, Dr. Loveday, if you want to
Okay.
answer it right quick. It says, what about the guys that are selling whole or half beefs that are taking them to the slaughterhouse and delivering the processed meat to the customer? Is this legal?
It depends on who you talk to. The preferred method is that that owner of that freezer beef deal with the processor and pay the processor themselves. And that's the preferred method. I guess I'll just be honest. I don't do that. I went to get my meat processed. I drive about 90 miles either north or either south of where I live. And I don't ask my customers to do that. But they come to the house and I do a bill of sale. And what I do is I put reimbursement of processing charge. And that might get me in trouble one of these days, but at least I'll tell you the preferred method is to do that, okay? It depends a little bit on the inspector at the time, but you look at that social cause type consumer group, they don't want any part of going to a slaughterhouse. And so they'll I've had them opt out when they found out they had to go pick it up.
That's not good.
All right.
We've got about 80% that have voted. So I'm going to go ahead and end this, and we'll share the results right fast for everybody to see.
Well, that's good. We didn't have 100% here, but in order to be compliant, we need 100%. So a good rule of thumb, one that's easy to remember is if you are reselling meat, then it has to be USDA inspected, okay? All right. Can I get rid of that? All right, Sarah asked me to share some of these questions she's had, and I've had them down the road. And one comment was, how do I know when my cattle are ready for harvest? And even though I don't work for university, I'll give you a good university answer, and that says, well, it all depends. You need to know what's your target market. You know, if you selling cattle that are directed toward, quote, lean, then you're not going to probably sell those cattle at the same condition that somebody's going to do grain feeding and this kind of stuff. And so also, you need to know what kind of cattle you're raising. And if you've got big frame cattle, I'll just show you this growth chart. It becomes very important, what we call logical slaughter endpoint, or it's a composition of those animals. If you look at a small frame animal that's probably going to finish out around 900 pounds, if you carry those cattle on up to 1,100 pounds, that extra 200 pounds is largely fat. And so all at once now, even though you've increased the weight, you've increased or decreased the yield or cutability of that animal. But if you look at that large frame animal, if you slaughtered it at 1,100, it might not be finished yet. Typically, a finished animal is going to have somewhere between 4 and 6/10 of an inch of fat. And it's very important to know where these cattle are in their growth plane so that you know what is the ideal slaughter endpoint. If they're over finished, they're going to lower your yields. If they're under finished, then you're going to have inferior quality. I saw on a, social media is really good. You learn lots of things. And there was a person fussing about a processor and said that the cuts of meat that she got was the strip steaks weren't as big as her hand, and the ground beef was extremely lean, and the cuts were small, and she didn't get all of her meat. But she finally said that the carcass weighed 286 pounds. And that animal was underfinished. It was not ready for market. It was back here in the growth phase of that growth curve. And that's the producer's fault. And those animals are not ready for slaughter. And they should not be taken. And I know certain things happen, a broke leg or something like this. You try to get something out of them, but don't sell them to a customer. That's the ones you sort of eat yourself and utilize somehow. Sarah and I was talking, also had a question. Guy wanted to move in the direction that we're talking, and he had several cows, close to 100 cows, and he knew he couldn't sell all his calves for freezer beef. So I told him what he needs to do is sell his good cattle that will bring that premium on the market and hold back the less desirable calves. And he didn't understand that how hard in a feeder calf sale, what they call the non-conformers are going to get discounted versus those slower growing, smaller framed or whatever are actually fit better into a freezer beef market than they do in our commercial trade, where the carcass weights right now are over 800 pounds. So pick and choose what you're going to sell. So what do these cattle look like? Here's an animal about 4/10 of an inch. You look at the fat on this animal. Keep in mind a live evaluation. Muscles are round, fat is flat. As these animals grow, and you can see the increase in width and muscle development, then they'll start laying on fat. And you can see from this carcass, this has a nice uniform cover of fat. It's not objectionable. You're going to have to trim a little bit off. You can use that in your ground beef. You might have to throw some of it away, but still, you've got enough cover on this carcass to protect it. And I'll mention some cooler issues. One we call cold shortening. Cattle that are underfinished are prone to cold shortening. Now here's a cattle that's over fat. You can see how heavy it is in the brisket. It's real poned up here around the tail head. Got a lot of fat in the flank. And when folks talk about a deeper flanked animal, I obviously haven't cut many because there's not any muscle there. It's all fat. And so this animal's completely covered with fat. You're beginning to see fat being piled on over the hip and along what we call the loin edge and down over the lower rib. And this cattle is excessively fat and wasty for the market. Then probably the number one question we get is, what happened to all my meat? I bought a 1,100 pound calf. I got half of it, but I didn't get near that much. A lot of our customers don't understand, and you need to be able to explain what's happened there. When you talk about live weight, live animal, another term is slaughter weight. That's when it's harvested. Most of these will be between 900 and 1,300 pounds on a freezer beef market. That animal then is converted to a carcass. We refer to that as carcass weight. Sometimes hot carcass weight, a cold weight, or a hanging weight. And these will be anywhere from about 5.5 to 800 pounds or heavier, depending on what kind of animal it is. And if you look at a hot weight versus a cold weight, it depends, or hanging weight, it may be typically 2 to 5%, even 8% less, because as that carcass hangs in the cooler, it's going to lose moisture. And so from that hot carcass weight to hanging weight at the time of cut, it's probably going to be losing some moisture from that. And if we've got a thin fat cover here, we're actually going to see some darkening of those muscle. And I've heard the word jerkification. I'm not sure that's a good word, but that drying out of that muscle surface, you can't put that, you shouldn't put that in ground beef because it ends up being a little chewy and knobbly kind of deal. Now that conversion from a live animal to the carcass, we refer to dressing percent. I've never liked the term dressing percent. We calculate the carcass weight divided by the live weight. In a typical fed beef industry, we're looking at 62 to 64% on these, on a dressing percent. Be a wide range, but anything that increases the live weight will decrease the dressing percent. The biggest example here would be gut feel. So if that animal stopped by the water tank right before you weighed it and took on a 5-gallon bucket of water, that's going to weigh about 40 pounds. And we do a lot on live weight, but it's one of the hardest true measurements to get because of that feel. Anything that increases fat or increases the carcass weight will increase the dressing percent. And a good example is fat cattle. As animals get fatter, that'll raise the dressing percent, but it decreases the cutability. So dressing percent is not a good term. It can deliver you down a bad road here. But you look at some of these situations, overfinished will increase the dressing percentage, underfinished will decrease the dressing percentage. Grass finish tends to be lower because of lack of muscle development and the fat development. Dairy type tend to be lower. Nothing wrong with dairy cattle, but the lean to bone ratio on dairy cattle tends to be lower. A pregnant heifer, if you weigh that animal, it's going to have a heavy live weight, but that fetus, when it's dropped out of the carcass, that carcass will it'll end up being a lower dressing percent. And your mature cows, we don't see many of those, but understand what dressing percent is and what's happening to that. So between that live animal down to the carcass, you've lost the head, the hide, organs, the shanks, the lower legs of these, the hooves. So you'd be surprised how heavy a beef head is. And so these are all weights that have been lost during this. The other factor, how much take-home meat you're going to have. I'll give you another good university answer. That's going to be variable. I've already indicated carcass fatness. The fatter they are, the less product yield should be. Superior muscling will increase your yield, but it certainly will not increase it at the rate that over-fat carcasses will decrease the yield. So you look at an average to a heavy muscled steer compared to a dairy type steer, yeah, your cutability or yield should be greater. The other is part of the cutting style that your customer might ask, or in your case, if you're selling retail cuts, what can you sell? Most customers prefer a 1/4 inch of external fat. They like it closely trimmed. And the more fat trim you take off of those retail cuts, the lower your yield is going to be. Again, cutting style. Are you taking those chuck roasts and making boneless chuck roast? Or do you have that big arm bone in those roasts? As you go more boneless, the lower the yield will be. As you put more cuts into ground beef or stew meat, the lower the yield will be. And so if you're looking at retail cuts, you need to look at your cutting style and what kind of yields that you're working with, because this will directly affect the pricing of those retail cuts. Now, if you're making a super lean product going from a regular ground beef somewhere around 25% down to a 10%, that's weight that's not in a package and weight that's not going to be going home. Trimming losses. Bruises and abscesses, there's not a whole lot we can do about them. They show up. Obviously, you're going to practice good quality assurance and eliminate those, but sometimes, you know, things happen on the farm, right? But one of the trimming losses, cattle that are aged for an extremely long time, you get some of that surface dehydration and such, you're going to lose weight, you're going to have greater trim loss, and again, this affects your yield and affects the pricing that you would have to have for those cuts. I'll show you this graph or table. It's in the handout I'm going to show you, but we stole this from Kentucky. I don't feel too bad about it because Greg Renfro stole it from South Dakota. That's what we do in Extension. Our research and development program is called R&D, is called Rip Off and Duplicate. And so that's what we've done here in this publication. But if you look at that 1,200 pound steer, you get about a 750 pound carcass. And out of that, you're going to get probably a little less than 500 pounds of packaged meat and with trim and a bone. And a rough guideline, you can see your ground beef and steaks and roasts and these kinds of things. They'll be home, be able to take in, put in the freezer. We do have a publication, How Much Meat to Expect from a Beef Carcass. And it discusses in detail some of those things I've shared with you. And if you got any questions, I'll just keep on. I want to touch a little bit on meat quality. Meat quality, one is from a marketing standpoint, and one is from real quality. If you're doing fresh meats, and most of you will not be doing fresh meat, color, texture, and firmness of the meat becomes very, very important. Eye appeal in the retail case sells. And some old research showed that consumers will use color second to price in making that decision. And just look at these two cuts. Which one looks fresher and has that take me home look in these cases? We talk about quality, meat quality, the lean quality. Generally, we refer to as tenderness, flavor, and juiciness. And one of the issues we have in the beef industry is consistency of that eating experience. And then we have that with our cattle, but the commercial industry, that's one of the things that they look at. One of the things that affect quality would be the genetics. And we're a little far north on the Bos indicus, but there is a genetic relationship with Bos indicus. They lack an enzyme that affects tenderness. And so it's just a natural thing. If you've got some Brahma type breeding, there's a potential that you can have a little less tender. It won't necessarily be unacceptable, but it just points out the importance of genetics and tenderness. We've got a lot more tools available to you in your selection process of using EPDs, gene mapping, and identifying some of these, and you can make tremendous improvement in quality. Feeding regimen. Typical here, you're going to be faced with grass versus grain. If we compare those, you need to be aware that grass-fed cattle gain slower. You're going to own them longer because it takes them longer to get to market. Your grain-fed will probably be going to market 16 to 18 months. Your grass-fed is probably going to be closer to 2 years. They tend to be thinner in fat cover. And I mentioned that cold shortening along with surface dehydration. So if you're going to age grass-fed beef for a longer period of time, you're at a higher risk of dehydration. And if they chill down too quickly, you're going to have this cold shortening where the muscle fibers shorten and they're going to be less tender. Put one in there, management and sex. Get lots of questions about bulls. By and large, when bulls hit that, start showing secondary sex characteristics. They become a lot more variable in their expected eating quality. And but generally steers and heifers are preferred over bulls. Granted, they grow faster and they're leaner, but they have a less desirable color and a lower degree of marbling. Maturity, or the age of the animal. Chronological age is a pretty good indicator, but in a grading situation, we use what we call physiological maturity. We look at the ossification patterns of the backbone. But as animals get harder bones, darker lean, they tend to be less tender because of a change in the connective tissue structure. And they can also have a coarser texture and sometimes even have a stronger, gamier flavor. Marbling, if you're doing grain fed, we're looking at marbling. We look at, that is a major factor in determining USDA quality grades. It's the fat within the muscle. My old meats teachers referred to it as the taste fat. That's the value of marbling, in that it improves the flavor and juiciness of the beef product. And this is an old graph that shows the increase in marbling, the impact that it has on flavor and or a positive eating experience. Now, there's cattle down here in the select and low choice range that are quite good. But as you decrease the marbling, one of the things you start looking at is the variation. And the cattle become more variable down in this area, in addition to the absolute factor there. Marbling does have an effect on tenderness, but not a great deal. And this is a shear force, which is the measurement of the force it takes to cut a core of meat. And you can see as marbling increases, the shear value goes down, which is good, but it's not a major factor in tenderness. Only about 10% of variation in tenderness can be contributed to marbling. Another question we get a lot is about aging. Aging is two types: wet aging and dry aging. Mostly when we're looking at local beef production, we're talking about dry aging. And it has two effects: tenderizing and meat flavor effect. Here you can see two beef ribs. One is in the vacuum bag. This is wet aging. It can stay up in there for quite a while. You do get an increase in tenderness, but you don't get the traditional dry aged flavor. This beef rib has been out on a shelf and has been dry aged. The typical question we get on aging is how long. Most of the data shows that you sort of max out the tenderness effect of aging after about 7 to 14 days. You don't increase it much after 10 to 14 days. There's some data out there now that shows, particularly some of our less tender roasts, by aging them in a bag for a longer period of time, we're getting a little bit better tenderness on those. But the other shows the effect on flavor, dry aged product versus wet aged versus traditional. The orangey color bar here is your dry aged. And you can see in that beefy and brown roasted flavor, that's where that excels, and that's the flavor that you get out of those. And the last thing there is questions about packaging. Typically, you have a paper or a vacuum package, and I'm really biased on this. If you have the option of vacuum packaging, don't hesitate. To me, that's the preferred method of packaging, even if you have to pay for it. Now, it's not foolproof. You'll still have leakers. It can tear, particularly on frozen product. But a good vacuum package, you can certainly exceed the recommended 12 months on steaks and roast in a paper. If you have to use paper, try to look at double wrapped or some that have wax linings inside. What you're trying to do is prevent surface dehydration. And that's the purpose of packaging, is prevent dehydration. And that's the common term we refer to as freezer burn. Okay? Any questions?
Dwight, we had one that was minimum hang time recommendations, and I would say that 7 to 14 days answered that question probably.
Yeah.
And somebody had something on here about UPC codes for restaurants and groceries.
What was that?
UPC codes for restaurants and groceries. How do you
That's
get
a
them?
labeling question that I have to get into. I'm not sure that's a requirement. That would be the requirement of the customer.
I know some of those profitable ag publications have got that in it. So
Yeah.
if anybody needs that, just talk to your agent.
Yeah. I went through a slide. I just thought of something else. When I looked at those challenges, when you get beyond record keeping and some of those kinds of things, but when we look at the processing side of it, really those are things that you ought to be doing anyway. The food safety and the wholesomeness aspect. So just because I got a big list there, don't let that scare you, because those are just good practices to begin with. All right.
Something on here about, is there any kind of grading system for lambs and sheep, Dwight, like the ones with beef?
Oh yeah, we do have a USDA lamb grading. It's very similar for beef. You use maturity of the lamb and flank streakings, which is sort of a marbling indicator. You combine those, and then you combine that with conformation of the carcass to get the final USDA quality grade.
Somebody was asking about specific recommendations for a breed, but that you really can't judge all. Like,
my answer to that question is that there's as much variation within a breed as there is across the breeds. And I had that hammered home to me. A good friend of mine was Jerry Lipsy, used to be executive director of Simmental Association. And he took over, and I said, which direction are you going to lead? Are you going to be a terminal sire, or are you going to go more maternal? And he says, why not do both? He said, you got genetic information, you can make decisions. And so every breed has a genetic information, you can make decisions. As we grew up, Charolais breed had a label that they wouldn't marble. There's lines in the Charolais breed right now will marble as well as an Angus. So, granted, at the marketplace, black hides have a little bit of favor.
Last one I see, Dwight, is the difference between, is aging time and hanging time the same thing, interchangeable terms?
Yes. While it's hanging, it's aging.
Yeah. Processing facilities, there's some of those, they've got to be licensed by the state, so you can get that list.
Yeah, I didn't put that one in, but CPA does have a list of USDA as well as custom exempt.
Somebody's asking, do we think there'll be more processors getting into the business now that the backup is so severe?
Based on phone calls I've had, I've been getting about 2 a week about building plants, how to start a plant, this plant's for sale. And in this last coronavirus, TDA has put a lot of money in supply chain disruption. And a lot of that has gone toward existing meat plants as well as some startups. So, but it takes time to work out of this. And for folks on the border, I know I had a contact from Kentucky. Kentucky's throwing money in that direction. South Dakota, I saw that. A lot of states have got USDA money, and they've really put it into some phase of improving the meat supply chain.
I don't see anything else in chat, Sarah, unless you do.
I haven't gotten any personal ones, so let's go ahead and launch the end of the session poll.
Okay.
So that should be live.
Somebody had on there about the USDA facilities. Your extension office can get that to you. Notes that's also in some of those Center for Profitable Ag publications. It has the ones that are listed in our area, so we could get that to you if you need it.
I'd be amiss. Your first stop ought to be your county extension agent, because y'all do have resources and particularly some local resources that can maybe help you get started. A lot of questions I get deal with USDA, and that's really not your biggest concern if you're looking at starting a plant, and you need to look locally at your local regulations, and particularly in terms of water and waste removal, because you do use a lot of water and you do generate quite a bit of waste, and you need a site that can handle that. So that's your first thing you got to start with, is finding a site.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Loveday, for joining us. If there are any other questions, if you'd hang around for just a couple minutes in case there's any stragglers that come in. But I think we've got most of them. I will leave this poll up here. By my count, I have 7:43, so we'll take about a 10-minute break right fast before we begin our second session. I am going to go ahead and post something in the chat box for everyone to see. That is a link to a feedback survey. Yes, these polls are fantastic for you to tell us what we're doing right and that kind of thing. But this survey that I just stuck in the chat box, it is not mandatory. It is not mandatory for certification. But it's just a way for you to tell us about your experience with the virtual format, things you'd like to see in the future, what you want to know, that kind of thing. So I posted that in the chat box. It'll be there for the rest of the evening, and I'll post that again next Tuesday as well. So we welcome your feedback. We want to know if the virtual format was okay. We know it wasn't ideal. It's not our ideal either. But if there's things that we can do to improve it, we want to know those things. So that's there for you to have that opportunity to share that feedback with us in an anonymous fashion. And with that, we'll see you back here in about 8 minutes or so.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Everybody else?
Tell Miss Rita I said hello.
I will. Hopefully she's fixing my supper. Hope I don't get you in trouble telling what I did.
Tell him what you did.
Yeah, well, I pick up my own lamb. It's a lot easier with lamb than it is beef, you know. But,
well, I mean, if anybody asks questions about that, you're just delivering something for a friend because you've got a truck bed, right?
There you go.
That'd be my explanation.
I tell you what, there's an inspector down Chattanooga area. We've gone round and round on that, and I got a little ugly. I said, surely even a government employee or a government judge could understand what the word reimbursement is.
Right.
So we've decided just to agree to disagree on that.
Perry, if you'd like to ask a question out loud, there should be a microphone icon, most likely in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. You just click on that and it should unmute you. If not, and you have a specific question and that doesn't work, feel free to type that in the chat box and we'll ask it for you.
But if you get any more questions, just give me a holler. You got my email,
I do.
phone number.
Thank you, Dwight.
We'll see y'all.
Thank you.
Is this working? No.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me? Hold on. I
Yeah,
gotta fix.
you must have figured it out.
I can't hear y'all anymore. Something happened. I turned my phone call off and just went with Zoom.
We can't hear you.
Lost the volume. Oh, you know what I bet happened? This thing took me off.
Yeah, some of you that are on telephones, they get.
All right.
Get,
Can you guys hear me?
We can.
For whatever reason, I lost speaker with the Zoom. I was on the dial-in plus the Zoom. I guess the doc logged off. Is he gone?
he did.
I don't know. Maybe somebody else can answer. But my question was going back to what he was talking about with as far as whether you're selling a live animal or whether you get into the kind of gray area of selling actual meat. And so what I've seen a lot of people doing, and it seemed logical because he was saying that it was problematic to sell a quarter or a half to multiple people if they didn't deal with the butcher or the processing plant. And I don't know. So that's what I was trying to get sorted, because it seemed to me if you sell a half, let's say you sell two halves, and then basically you're helping them fill out the slaughterhouse's cut sheet, so they're not using your cut sheet, they're using someone else's, they're using the slaughterhouse's cut sheet. You're just kind of helping them understand, because most people don't understand all their choices when it comes to a whole cow and all the different cuts and packaging sizes that they can choose from, that sort of thing. And at the end of the day, they're basically hiring you to do the delivery and pickup, after the processing's completed. So at the end of the day, you're still selling them a live animal. You're just also sort of subcontracted, if you will, to handle the logistics. Did I lose y'all?
Sarah, I'll try to chime in on this with Perry being my producer. Perry, basically, that was a whole lot of gray areas is what you just did right there. Anytime you go beyond the specifics of a live animal, when you're trying to say, well, they're going to hire me for this, this, and this, you're diving into cuts. So you got to be very careful in those gray areas. So if they're hiring you for that, it needs to look like it's all a part of the actual animal. So be very careful how you're wording a lot of those things if you're going to sell quarters and halves and all that stuff.
What do you mean by how I'm wording them? As far as like if I advertise?
Yes, even like you said, when you said hiring to deliver, to pick up the meat, when you said pick up the meat and stuff, that becomes part of the quarters and holes and all that stuff. So
see, that's where I'm thrown off, because it always seemed like a quarter. What legally the state would allow you to do is sell quarters and halves, and but you weren't allowed to sell cuts of meat.
No, you can sell fours of an animal. So basically, you sold that animal to 4 people.
Yeah.
And let them divide it up however they want to, and they go pick it up and all that stuff. Now, if they give you special permission to pick it up and all that stuff, that's again, a little bit of a gray area. So.
I got you. Okay. But yeah, I was trying to get my head around it, because I could see it if the beef's coming back to you, if the beef's going from the processing plant right back to the end customer, then I was just trying to get my head around how that becomes selling beef,
If you're not a retail in the retail and selling quarters, you got to try to keep yourself from being the middleman on that stuff as much as possible.
So then the only thing a producer really needs to do if they want to be more like provide more of a end user customer support experience is get that license. And then if you're not really, if you're not going to store it yourself, then you just have to handle, like, get your arms around whatever the transport requirements are.
Yes.
Is that, where are those transport requirements listed at?
CPA has a publication where you can find a lot of those. CPA is Center for Profitable Agriculture with University of Tennessee. We have a publication that kind of does that, but those permits and all that is through the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. You can find all that on the Tennessee Department of Agriculture website.
Okay.
Anthony,
All right. Yeah, I'll take a look.
I might be able to add a little bit of clarity to that too. Whenever you're invoicing the person that you're selling to, if you're selling 4 quarters to 4 different people, then your invoice to that person needs to be 1/4 interest in a live animal. And whatever that amount of money is needs to cover any other services that you're doing. But your invoice needs to be 1/4 interest in this live animal, you know, air tag number or, you know, some sort of identification there. But whenever you start listing, you know, this many dollars for transportation, this many dollars for this many dollars for that, that gets you into a lot of really gray area. So your
Oh yeah, I
invoice
don't
should,
list any of that. I guess I was just thinking if someone ever inspected or audited or asked questions, like that's just part of the, I don't know,
As
from my
long as you-
perspective anyway, it's
And
part of the
that- yeah,
service.
and
Like they gotta, I'm not asking them to show up with their trailer and pick up my animal.
Processor needs to like do fourth, 25% to each person. Document
Right.
that too, so that could be inspected, you know, that would match up.
your buyer needs to pay the processing bill for their quarter. In other words, you don't need to pay that and then them reimburse you. They need to write a check to the processor for 1/4 of the total bill or whatever. And then the invoice that you give them and they pay you for is that 1/4 interest in a live animal. But it's pretty important that they pay the processor because that signifies that they own that animal whenever it walked off the tray. And that's where you want to be.
That's exactly correct. I can testify. I just worked with somebody not too long ago, and that they went back and checked on that. So that's pretty critical.
That's some severe semantics and hair splitting right there. They got, I guess, lawyers are involved.
They can be.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Bill paid the processing fee, not Joe, and so that makes it Bill's and not Joe's animal. But Joe's got a bill to sell for the animal. Anyway, just a weird, you know, just somebody
It just
out there trying
provides
to
a
make
pretty
things
clear paper
difficult.
trail that, and what you're trying to do is prove that you sold a live animal and that animal was live whenever it went into the kill floor owned by the person who's taking the meat. And that
Well, you
just
got a
helps
bill of sale that
clarify
does that, and if it's USDA inspected, it didn't show up dead. So anyway, I'm not trying to argue with you guys. I'm just trying to get my head around some of this nonsense because
I understand, but what
So-
we're talking about is paying the processing bill. As long as the guy that owned the animal whenever it walked off trailer pays the processing bill, then that provides a clear paper trail all the way through. So yeah, it is kind of a serpentine trail to follow, but you know, you sell the animal to John Doe, and if John Doe pays processing bill, that also shows that he owned the animal, a live animal, and you just hauled it to the slaughterhouse out of the goodness of your heart.
And so when you're talking about someone following the paper trail, at what point does this paper trail get followed? We're talking about if like someone gets, I don't know, food poisoning from the beef or something along those lines. Is that why?
It could be something along those lines. It could be as simple as an audit of the books of the processor. Just anything to throw up a red flag.
Bingo. That's all I'm going to say. Processors do get audited. That's all. I won't go any farther. So that can be a big deal.
Right. I'm tracking with you. So then what comes back on the beef producer, if you will, or the cattle producer, if they audit the processor and say, well, this guy, you know, was in the gray area or whatever of selling beef and not live animals? Does it hurt the processor somehow?
It doesn't necessarily hurt the processor, but there could be some ramifications back to you as a producer, because in the eyes of the law, you broke state law if they can prove that you were selling a side of beef, or some portion of a carcass as a retail without being licensed. And what the